Okay, so welcome, Justine Reyes, speaking to us today from Queens. We're really, really grateful that you've spent the time inspiring us, speaking to us. And I'm just going to launch straight into the first question. What inspired you in Vanitas?
Um, well, with this body of work, Vanitas, my own take on Vanitas, I had always loved these paintings and I look at painting a lot. I think in my work, inspired a lot by painting. And I was applying for a residency at the Center for Photography at Woodstock, CPW. And one of the questions they ask in the application is, what would you do with the time spent and the equipment and things like that? And so I thought to myself, well, what would I do? And I hadn't started making this project yet, but I thought, oh, this would be a great idea to propose. And so I just had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. And I had been making work about my family, about my mom and my uncle for quite a bit. And I obviously I could work on the files or something like that. Or, I mean, at that time I was shooting all film and printing in the darkroom. And Woodstock only had a black and white darkroom, and I wasn't doing a lot of black and white work. So saying, oh, what can I do? I wanna take some pictures there. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to insert myself into my work, because I am definitely a part of my Home Away from Home project, but more so in, as the photographer, the people, my family, they're reacting to me. And so their expressions and things are definite reaction to me. And it's more about the way that I look at them, and the aging process of my family. But this was a way to still talk about family history and legacy and about myself. So the objects pictured are things that had belonged to my grandmother that I kept after she passed away, and things of my own that were important to me. And not every picture has like one of mine and one of hers, some do. But every picture has an object of familial importance. Oops, oh my God, I didn't set my phone off. That is so embarrassing. Let me turn that off. No one
I'm
ever
just
calls
wondering
me.
about the objects that we can see. When we've got something that belongs to you, how did you go about selecting the thing that was in some way representational of you?
So some of the things are things that I've collected. There's a couple of lunch boxes. There's a King Kong lunchbox, and then there's an Ethiopian traditional lunchbox, food carrying case, that are in two of them. I used to kind of have a lunchbox collection, and a lot of the things of my grandmother's are things that I played with as a child, so they were also kind of mine in a way.
But
A
so is
lot of the
this really a kind of
figurines.
conversation about childhood and the distance between childhood and your life now as a woman?
I mean, in a sense, I just think, well, I was raised by my grandmother, two of my uncles, and my mom. We all grew up in the same house. And I think it's more of this kind of idea about like my grandmother as the matriarch, and I have a lot in common with my grandmother and a lot of the ways that she was and her personality. And so I think just drawing that line, between past and present, and I think obviously the connection with my mom is there, but in the way that this series works, it's kind of drawing this line through time, in a sense, through someone who's passed. And also after someone passes away, it's like a different way that you think about them. And then you realize, how is this person important to me? And, what did they leave, in a sense, with me? Like, not object wise, but just like, what did they instill in me and what's important to me? And so I think the conversation has a lot to do with drawing that kind of line, and just things that, you know, things that that have been touched a lot, like even the wood. This one is not as much, but like the surfaces of the tables that I used were like very worn.
Were they actually tables from your home where you grew up?
Not all of them. This one was not, but there are a few. Like one that's really worn is a desktop of mine from when I was a child. But these tables, some of these, I started this in Woodstock, but I didn't, you know, complete the whole series there because it was only a month. But some of them are like these really old tables that have their own history as well, that were part of this historical house that they had placed us in for this residency. So yeah, just also thinking about, you know, the objects themselves being a metaphor for the body, right? So like the wear and tear on the objects, and just thinking about like the physical body and the aging process.
I picked this photograph to start with because I also got, when I look at your work, I get a really strong sense that somebody is still there. Somebody is still there. They remain. Like, you know, the cup of tea is still there. It's only part gone. The grapes are ready to be eaten. It's like there's like a momentary lapse where someone is maybe turned away or something has happened, and it's like a fragment of time for me. So you're describing a line of time. Time is passing, and these photographs are sweeping us along with that time. But this is like the golden suspension for me. It's a really beautiful, quiet, reflective moment in which I feel the presence. I mean, I'm not sure who the presence is. That's your story to tell, but definitely that the character, the person, the nature of someone is definitely there. It's interesting to think that actually really what you're saying is that there's in some ways actually two people present at all times. And does that mean that there's a kind of collapse of identity between you and your grandmother anyway? I mean, you're saying you're very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think with anyone, like with our close family and anyone that's important to us, we're taking a little bit of that person. Yeah, I think the person always remains, right? Like they're not physically here. Maybe the objects are physically here, but the objects in a sense don't matter. It's just a reminder of what is and what was and what's still there. I mean, I did another body of work. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's called What Remains, and it's just these white t-shirts on the black background. And those I made in response to my Uncle Vinny's death. And yeah, just thinking about the body and the spirit and the energy of a person.
I don't have an example as such of that, but I do want to just go to this because I think this is a drawer, isn't it, of your Uncle Vinny's?
Yes.
The four last things on Novissima?
It's yes, the four last things. So it's this series is this. I mean, it's not really a series. It's just a piece, right? It's 4 pictures, but it's called These Last Things. But it's based on the Novissima, the 4 last things. Yeah, my uncle. I mean, and part of that is because my uncle was very like super religious person. And so when I was thinking about this work and thinking about him as a person and some of the objects left behind, I mean, I have a whole body of work that's not on my website on my uncle and his objects. It's like portraits and portraits of him and portraits of his objects.
Do you want us as the audience to get to know him through these objects? Or is it a totally different thing going on?
I think it's different. I mean, I think in a way, for me, these were a way of letting go or passing through those stages of grief and having to deal with the stuff that gets left behind.
Mm.
And you know what I mean, this series and the shirts, what remains, like the shirts were in another set of drawers, so there are actually 6 drawers, but some of them had the shirts. And then yeah, I was like supposed to be emptying, you know, it's like that whole ritual of going through someone's things after they've passed away, and like, what do you do with this? Like, what do you keep? What do you throw out? What do you give to someone else? And um, I think that can be cathartic. For me, I knew I wanted to photograph these. I kind of thought of them as these sort of ready-made still lives, and wanting to just, for me, they say a lot about him as a person, but I don't know if that's important to me to translate. I think what's more important is to translate the sense of loss and longing, and this wanting to hold on to something that isn't there, and wanting these things to mean more than they do. You know, like, I think there's um this really hard thing that I try to reconcile, because I am not a materialistic person, and yet I can't throw away so many things because of being sentimental, and then trying to not place so much weight on these objects, right? But I don't know, it's hard, because I think objects do get charged, right, with like the energy of a person, and I think objects can be very powerful, but I don't want to like keep everything, which is what I do anyway. So
So
sometimes I try to,
is your way of preserving anyway to photograph the objects that you would otherwise have to keep? So there's
well, I,
it's a kind of an expedient or a very tidy way, I guess, of still keeping hold of something by
yes, my problem is that I photograph them and then I think, great, now I can get rid of it. And then it's like more precious because now it's in one of my photographs that, like, these drawers may still have these things in them, and I might have just put them back in the dresser and moved it to the garage, like my mom's garage. So I don't even know. Like, I don't know if I did actually take any of this stuff out
Can I
after.
ask, when you photograph these things, and you said that your uncle and your mum and your sort of extended family are together, did your mum have anything to say about you photographing these objects? Was there any resistance from any of your family?
No, thankfully, or to being photographed. I mean, they had already, I mean, I have a very beautiful, loving family. They just always supported me to be an artist, and um, yeah, I had been photographing them through grad school. Even though I went to school in San Francisco, I was coming back and forth quite a bit,
Mm.
and I had started photographing them then, and they've always been very willing participants. And when I started photographing them, I moved back home after graduate school for a few years, and I was photographing them a lot for that series, and that's kind of when I was doing most of the bulk of that work. And you know, I was having a lot of shows at one point. You know, I'd be in a group show and there would be pictures of my family, and they would come to the openings, and it just made them more collaborative.
Mm. Yeah,
So they
because
would,
they really are like a central, they are the hub of everything you
yeah.
seem to do. I mean, I'm going to just show this photograph. Uh, Although, for example, on the website, when looking at your work, the drawers are separate, and you've got the t-shirts, the what remains is separate, and then you have these photographs as well. They are all still, they're circling always the same thing. Was there a period of real time, like an amount of time it took to go through this process of grieving, or are you still doing that, and are you still doing that through photographs?
Yeah, it was a long time of making work about death and dealing with grief and thinking about mortality. I don't want to say I'm not like, oh, I'm not grieving anymore. I think I've moved to a different stage. My uncle Al passed away, I think it's been 6 years now. And so it's a little easier. And my mom is 85. I see her all the time. And I guess I'm back to where I was, where I started. So when I started making work about my family, it was always with this idea of trying to hold on to something that's slipping through your hands. So, I mean, my family is so much older. Like my grandmother, my uncles, like everyone's like 50 or more years older. My mom had me at 43. And so I guess death has always been a thought in my mind. Like, oh yeah, these people are not going to be here forever. They're like the best things in my life. And so always just kind of thinking about this impending doom.
Mm.
Still have that because I still have my mom here, um, who were very, very close, the same way I was with my uncles. And so, you know, it's like living on borrowed time. So a lot of this impetus for the work was this idea of preserving something that, like, I knew I wasn't going to be living there for so long. And after grad school, when I came back, and just wanting to hold on to something that was changing or, you know, evolving constantly. And um yeah, I mean, I'm making way different work now than I have in the past, and I think it's a different way. Like after my uncle Al died, I was just like sick of death. And
That, I mean, a very personal and probably impertinent question would be, did the moving away from death all the time happen or coincide with the birth of your own children?
yes,
Mm.
for sure. Yeah. Um yes, because you gain so much, right? So it's not about the loss. I mean, it's hard because I'm like, oh, I wish my uncle were, you know, here with us. But yeah, it's all about life. Like everything's all about life. And I mean, that's interesting too, because my work, I after my son was born, I started doing like a lot of work, um, kind of in reference to color theory and like how colors interact with each other. And I started doing a lot of digital stuff, um, with like compositing and things like that. So, and I was thinking a lot about color and just like really vibrant colors
I
and
am going
rich
to
colors.
go back. I'm going all over the place. We're not going in the sequence of our original format, but I'm just going to show these. I mean, this really kind of colorful work. Truthfully, for me, there's still an element of the kind of somber. There's something somber still about this.
This is transitional. So I've been making these for like over 10 years, and just slowly, I feel like you need the like buildup of these. Like I have like maybe 80 of them now finally, but it's like a slower process because it's all in the dark room. You know, it's just cameraless and color dark room, black and white dark room. And so, yes, this was a kind of start where I started thinking about just like swaths of color, you know, like these back, like just creating color. I mean, in this case, I'm dialing it in, right, in the dark room, like just dialing the lights in to create these colors. Um, and it is about loss. I mean, it's still about, like I said, this is kind of a transition between where I'm at now and where I was before, because I've been suddenly working on this for so long. And so this project has influenced newer bodies of work.
Are these objects, so as collections, still um, do they still have sentiment? You know,
Yes.
they're impersonal objects. They're you know, anyone could have them. There's a definite, obviously, visual distinction between these kinds of objects or these kinds of objects and the plastic bags, or is there?
In a way, I mean, like I said, so I have I want to be like minimalist and everything. That's my dream ideal. I'm kind of like a non-consumerist. Like yeah, I don't know. But then I get like, I really love certain objects. So I've actually been collecting these. I think the first bags I collected were like 2001, when I was in San Francisco. I would do a lot of my shopping in Chinatown. There's I never drove, being from New York City. I do now, but there was a bus from Chinatown to where I live, like a direct bus. And so I would always do my grocery shopping after school there because I didn't have a car and I didn't know how to drive. So there was just beautiful bags that they had in Chinatown. They were like pink with red flowers. And so I started collecting these bags. I'm really interested in the bags. I mean, all of the bags say thank you in some format. Thank you for shopping here. Thank you for your patronage, or thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I'm kind of interested in that idea of gratitude, right? And this like little sentiment that you just see people carrying them around everywhere. And it's just like, like we don't think about them and everybody has them. But these are also dying, right? So like plastic bags, when I started this project, at some point when I was in San Francisco around 2003 or 2004, they were like the first state to ban plastic bags here in the States. And it's also like about this object that's, you know, one day will just be gone, right? It's something that's so much a part of our lives. And then we, you know, our children won't have these things anymore. And I'm not saying they're good things to have, but and I won't be sad to see them go. But I just became really interested in how many different patterns, and also these are all from, you know, small stores. Like this isn't a Home Depot bag. This isn't like a Whole Foods bag. This isn't like a store, right? This is individual stores that somehow go somewhere, Uline, online, wherever, and pick out a design for their bags to order for their store. You know, sometimes it's food. Like if you get takeout, then you might get these bags or something. You know, a small hardware store. I mean, I'm trying to think of where I've gotten all these bags, like little grocery stores, things like that over the years. And I'm just amazed that I keep finding new designs. And I'm like, wow, there's literally hundreds of designs of these bags just to say thank you. And so there's something so interesting to me about that idea of like picking out what the bag is like, and the sentiment of it, and just love seeing like people with their carrying around these little thank you bags.
I mean,
I
I
don't
think
know why.
of everything that I've seen of yours, this is the most obliquely melancholy of it all. You know, everything else perhaps has a more direct line to something that is quite doleful. It definitely has a sense of sadness or a residue of grief. These, to me, they're so deceptive. The colors are still like quite brash, they're so saturated, and yet I definitely get the feeling that there's an element of being discarded, no matter that gratitude is there, that there's something so incredibly destructive in being thrown away.
Yes. And I found like a lot of these are like found in the street. You know, this is the
Yeah.
idea of like trash, right? It's destructive. I mean, the plastic itself. And then you'll see like some of them have holes in them, some of them are like knotted up and have like dirt inside of them.
Do you think that you also, you know, you have a particular relationship with things that otherwise would be discarded?
I was just about to say, maybe it's all trash. When you like flip back to this thing, I was like, well, maybe it's all like garbage. Like maybe that's I, I don't know. Yes,
I
like I
don't think
said,
I don't think I was saying it quite
sentimentalize
that way.
objects and play.
I do wonder about it, this sense of, you have these things that are, of course, loaded. You give us them in a really neatly packaged format, I think, when you liken it to Dutch memento mori, painting, those kind of conventions that are kind of deeply imprinted on our cultural appreciation of a certain time, a kind of particular cultural paradigm. And yet the plastic bags are still doing the same thing. We're still looking at this, uh, a dialogue with something that is fleeting, that has the weight of the world left as a residue in it, on it somehow. But that you are interested enough as a human who's looking to see it and to make us notice it, which is really special. The students at school have been looking at your work, and we've been studying beginning and end, basically, is our title for our project. There are so many beginnings in the endings of things, and that materialism is kind of obvious, I suppose, because of collections of objects. But there's also like an anti-materialism in everything you seem to do. It's really fascinating interplay. I did want to ask you very particularly about the cherries. We spoke a little bit before we came on to record about this. Do you think there's a particular female understanding of time that's different? Like, as a female, do you experience time differently?
I mean, I think yes, I would. I mean, I think we do. In terms of who we are, right? Like the shift for me from daughter to mother, it has been a great shift. And obviously, there's only a certain amount of time, right, where you're childbearing, and so. Andy, that's really interesting. I feel like I feel like I have to stop talking for a second because I might have a new project in mind just based on this conversation. Because yes, I think that, sorry. Yeah, no, my mind is like spinning with like, wow, I have so many ideas because I don't think I've posed that question to myself about just like womanhood and how time. I feel like I think there's all these obvious things that I could say, but you just made me think a lot about all the personal aspects of it that now have my mind going, like all of a sudden I have a million ideas for a project.
Do we need to start recording so you can go write them down?
But yeah, I mean, in a lot of the work, like the fruit that I'm using, obviously like the seed fruit, like the cherries, and I have another one with like a split open pomegranate or a cantaloupe with all the seeds. And in this one, it's the buttons becoming the fruit instead, or the fruit being missing.
Do you also, this might just be my interpretation, but very often, there is a really female aspect to your work that looks like this. And again, talking to students at school, thinking about this idea that, again, about maybe being discarded, time has passed, someone's, sloughed off who they once were, or perhaps they've been peeled back or pared away, or then we're just left with, in this case, plastic buttons. But that in itself, there's something so incredibly reassuring about that we're left still with something. There's a legacy always for each of us, as much as your grandmother has left these things and now you take them on, so you too will leave these things, and that line of time that you were talking about earlier continues. You're on the line, moving with it. I know.
Well, I mean, I think
I know these are all photographs, but I wonder if you could tell us, if you were to photograph now in a similar style, how the objects would change with this newfound sense of being yourself, the mother.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how much the objects, I think some of these things, because they're um, things that I kept of my grandmother's that I related to so much, like the buttons and this idea of sewing, right? Like that's such like a stereotypical, right? Classic old lady I am turning into. But I mean, things that I've always loved, hand stitch. It's like this idea of like hand stitching, right? And things that take time, when we do like a craft or something with our hands. Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, my grandmother, not a part of this piece, but my grandmother taught me how to crochet when I was like 8 or 9. And then I did a semester in Zimbabwe, and I lived with a family, and crocheting is like a big thing in Zimbabwe. And my host mother that I live with taught me a lot more because I was interested in it. And then I was traveling around after I took a semester off to travel since I was already in Africa. And I met a woman who invited me to stay with her and her family. And her stepmother was visiting from Uganda, and she taught me like amazing techniques in crochet. So yes, so this piece, this installation, I started, the picture that has like the blue tinted light is from my graduate studio in San Francisco. And I basically started crocheting these panels. Gosh, it was like when the war started, I think it was 2004. And then I stopped crocheting when it ended. And so they're just like a buildup on a meditation on
But
war.
they're still about time, and they're still also funny that you said straight away. So you said, "Oh, these aren't about my grandmother," but I suppose she's kind of in there as well, isn't she? Somehow,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, yes, in all of my work, but it's funny that, yeah, and thinking about these, I mean, people still crochet. There's like a movement of people who crochet, but it isn't as common, right? That my grandmother's day, everybody knew needlepoint, crocheting, like mending, and it's just also these traditions that are also dying, like are just not in not as common in terms of everyday women, because it was just like female. I mean, now men crochet and knit and things like that.
Also, even the language you're using to, explain it to us, this idea of mending, this idea then that we go back again to the Vanitas photographs. There's an element again of this idea: is it discarded, is it not? Well, no, because we mend it through time, through the elevation of the object, because you record it still. And I have to say, the things I so enjoy thinking about that prompt me to think in your work always comes back again, even this, to a sort of central theme. I think to start on Vanitas is almost kind of doing it a disservice, because the theme runs through everything, which is about gratitude. It's about life. It's not actually really about death. It's about how one lives beyond one's actual life through objects and your relationship with those objects. I think the work's really beautiful. I've so enjoyed learning about it, looking at it.
Thank you so much. It's yeah, it's funny because I haven't haven't even really thought about this installation piece in a while. And some of this is older work, and um, it's good for me to think about how I contextualize the work that I'm making now, because when I do look back at things, I do see, oh yeah, I'm really not, it's aesthetically different, right? Like a crochet installation is aesthetically different. And some of the new work that I'm making is still photography, but it's aesthetically very different. Like a photogram and the Vanitas pieces are very aesthetically different. But yes, the conceptual threads, I think, are tied together. Or I'm just thinking about the same things.
I'm gonna finish back at this one, mainly because I'm really curious about the yellow box and the hair. Can you tell us anything about it?
The box, the tin is a tea tin that my grandmother had, and the hair was a wig of my mother's. So this actually has the three of us in it. This is, I think, the only one that has something of my mom's. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but this was like a short wig that my mom used to wear. I guess in the 60s or 70s, and I had kept it for a long time as a kid. I was really interested in this. She didn't wear it when I was a kid, but she had it. So I've had that myself as like a hidden object. Like probably something I wasn't supposed to. I don't think like my mom gave me her wig. I think I like took it somehow, and then once I had it, just held on to it. And then the fan is the fan was a fan that I had gotten at a wedding I had gone to recently. And so yeah, there's I use fans all the time. I also have a collection of fans from all these places that I've been. Like one of my weird collections. And I sweat a lot, I think. And I always like have a fan in the summer. I mean, now I don't. It's interesting, since having kids, I don't think I've used my fans ever because I need my hands all the time.
But also, I mean, then if I was speaking to you and I wasn't actually speaking to you as the photographer, and yet you had given me this kind of insight into these objects, I would say that this is the ultimate photograph of time passing for women, right? Because
Yeah, my
we've got
mom probably
pages.
stopped wearing that wig, when she had us in the 70s, like my brother. And she probably stopped caring the way I stopped. Like, I just sweat now. If I'm sweating, I don't use a fan. I'm like, I guess that's just like, when you just stop doing a lot of the things you did as an individual, then you become a mom, and then you're totally like, don't think about your sweat or anything like that, or any other bodily things. You're just secondary to the child. I think I definitely do that a lot. And I know my mom did that a lot.
I mean, I think, and again, in terms of like conventions of painting, of course, you got the shaft of light, you've got the black background, the fan. The fan, is that in place of like the candle, like the gust of wind, the movement?
The drawer is also open in this one.
Yeah.
This fan lived in this. This was one of my desks, actually. And I probably had taken the fan out just from inside the desk. But that tea tin, I still have that tea tin. And when we move, I know exactly where I'm going to put that tea tin. And then, so these are also things that I'm interested in, like when you have something that you really love. So I'm not materialistic, or I don't care about like something expensive or whatever. But when you do have something that you really care about, and then, so my kids that tea tin is now going to be a part of how they grow up and see things, like, it still has tea in it, and yeah, it's still serving its purpose. And
Do you hope that there's an element of legacy in these objects for your own children then as well?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I didn't have a lot of toys growing up. And so my toys, a lot of the things I played with were these breakable things that were my grandmother's. I don't think like I could allow my boys to play with porcelain. I feel like they would be broken, and somehow I didn't play like that as a kid, and so they let me play with all these tchotchke things like that were always around, you know. I mean, I grew up in my grandmother's house, so it's like a house of older people, and all the things that's probably in anybody else's grandmother's house is like how I grew up. And so I think there's something different, you know, even though my mom was living with us, it wasn't like I was raised by my grandmother, but just being around older people and people who had survived the Depression and things like that. I mean, there was a different, you know, you didn't get rid of things. You didn't just buy things. Objects were, I think, had this importance because you really cared about what you had. Whereas we're in a more disposable culture now. And so I don't know if there'll be many of those objects that have a life for my children. Because I'm trying to only actually preserve the utilitarian things that are also beautiful. Like I love this tea tin. I think it's really beautiful. And it has a use, but there's a lot of things that I think are beautiful, but I don't have a china cabinet, you know, to display, or I don't want to have displays of those things.
But
I mean,
you
my
want
picture,
other people to see the beauty in these objects, otherwise you wouldn't photograph them maybe.
I do, and like, you know, maybe they'll see them through the photographs, but maybe not all the, you know, I mean, I still own all of these things. I haven't thrown out anything, but we're moving soon. And so we'll have to be like, everything's kind of packaged up because we're in an apartment. We're moving to a house. And so I think certain things will be unpacked and certain things will be used. My mom's friend gave me her mother's bone china as just a gift because she didn't want it, you know, just to go to waste. She doesn't have any children. And I'm definitely using that. My husband was like, we can't, you know, and I was like, we're using it every day. It's beautiful. Like we're using it and then it's going to break. And then maybe I'll photograph it in something when it breaks, and we're going to like use things. Cause there's also that like element of holding on to things, I think. And like this fear of not having something that also comes into play, like saving things because you might need it, or not wanting to waste. And I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a different way of life than what I even do myself, how I live now. But yeah, I mean, there's so many memories attached to this. It's an interesting question of what my kids will have those same feelings about. But I have a feeling that there are things in my mom's house, because we visit my mom all the time in the house I grew up in. There's still things there that I played with and are in these photographs, like the birds and the pomegranate. Those birds are still there. There's something not that I didn't photograph, but that I played with all the time, and my kids always play with them. My mom's always like afraid they're going to break it. So I think there'll be more of those things from her house, because even though it's changed and it's more modern, there's like I said, you don't throw those things away. And so yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they'll gravitate to or what their memories will be. We talk a lot about plastic and waste and things like, I try to make them conscious of those things.
Well, it's been really, really interesting hearing the proper insider view on so many things come up looking at your work. As I said before, from my own point of view, and I know many of my students would echo this, looking at the sort of overview of everything you do, yes, there is often a sense of sadness and of melancholy. It meets us, when we first look at the work, but actually then there's a kind of beautiful sense of life, of something that keeps going, that's not, for me, not even on a line. It just is about life and living through different times, different faces and places, nonetheless of equal power. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you for having me, Sandy. It was great to talk to you finally.
Yeah,
And,
lovely to meet you as well.
and thank
So
you for
thank you
sharing
very
all of
much.
this with students.
Yeah, and everybody loves what you do. We've been looking, as I said, a lot at the Vanitas photographs in particular, but really we could look at anything from the whole kind of archive of what you do and find something really inspirational in it. So
Thank you.
thank you.